Eugene Bullard. This is the origin story of kind of one of history's biggest badasses, really. He's famous for being the first black fighter pilot, which I kind of find to be the least interesting thing about the dude. This is basically a dude who just lives so balls out that if Hollywood did a biopic of him, you'd think it was made up. Basically a flesh and blood example of that, just some motherfuckers are born different. The French even gave him a sick-ass nickname, Hirondelle Noire de la Mort, which means the Black Sparrow of Death. He was born in 1895 in Georgia. When he was 8 years old, he witnessed his dad barely surviving some white folks showing his dad the wrong way to use a rope. And in the aftermath, his dad was telling him about this place called France. His dad's not really Morgan Freeman, that's just who's playing him in the movie. And he's like, in France, a black man can hold his head up high, he doesn't need to live like this. Eugene's like, well, why do we live here? And he's like, this is where we're from, this is our home. And Eugene's like, oh no, God forbid, we can't leave all this. And he's like, well, this is our home here anyways, this is where we live. And Eugene's like, yo dad, I love you, but if there's a place like that, I ain't sticking around here, bro. You can come with me or not come with me, but dude, I'm out. And he ran away from home. All right, so only made it as far as Dawson's, Georgia, but by that time he was only 11 years old. What's he gonna do? Well, you sitting around with your stupid ass bowl haircut playing with Ninja Turtle toys. This 11-year-old boy hitching across the South. In Dawson, he ran into a group called the Turner family. They were from Birmingham. They were these English gypsies, if you can kind of picture Peaky Blinders, except in this case they were into like horse racing. So in which case they were exactly like the Peaky Blinders. But they loved this kid. He started as like working in their stables, and then they were into boxing, so he got into boxing with them. Eventually they had him racing horses for him. So I just want you to picture yourself at the age of 12 or 13. This dude's bare knuckle boxing with gypsies, horse racing with grown ass men. Well, one day Eugene was telling the stories about his plans to go to Paris because what his dad told him, and they're like, the UK's kind of like that, and you got to learn a new language. And he's like, that reminds me, I got to get the hell out of the South. So he made his way to Virginia, and then he jumped and hit on a German ship, and he made it over to the UK. And we got there and needed a job, and he remembered he knew how to whoop ass, so he started boxing over there. People always told him how funny he was and what a good storyteller he was, so he got into the arts and he joined a comedy troupe, which he actually kind of liked the UK pretty good. But then when one of his professional boxing matches went to Paris, and he got there and he's like, you know what, this was my dream, this is where I am. Plow. But shortly after he got there, the Germans started doing some German shit, and he joined the French military. This is World War I, if you're keeping score. Dude was in all kinds of different units, but one was with the French Foreign Legion and the French Moroccan Division. In the beginning of 1915, they had about 22,000 troops, and by the end of that year, they had about 3,000 left, Eugene being one of them. While Eugene was recovering from some injuries in the hospital, some dude was telling him about airplanes, and he's like, dude, I could probably do that. And the guy's like, no, you couldn't. So on a bet, he signed up for the flight training school, so after he got out of the hospital, he did that. He tried to be an American fighter pilot, but there's something about the complexion test that he didn't pass, so they only were picking white guys. So he flew for the French, and he flew the shit out of those airplanes. He was blowing up all kinds of stuff. World War I, Eugene won so many medals, and he had them on his chest. He looked like Mr. T. But the war ended, and he's like, what do I do now? I guess I'll start drumming in a jazz band. He didn't even know he knew how to drum, but all of a sudden he turned out to be real good at it. So he was really digging the jazz stuff, and he was playing that, and he ended up getting a club, and this club became the spot, dude. All kinds of jazz musicians, poets, Hemingway, Langston Hughes. This dude was the dude. And then as they tend to do, the Germans came back to do some more German shit. And when they invaded Paris, they all liked hanging out at his club because it was the spot. And Eugene was like, dude, I don't want all these Nazis up in my club. But the French government's like, do you speak German? He's like, I didn't know I could, but actually I can because I can do just about anything. They're like, why don't you spy for us? But one time I was hustling these Nazis. A French dude thought Eugene was with the Nazis and he ended up shooting them. So he took a bullet in World War II as well. Maybe this is me being racist, but if I see a black dude talking to a Nazi, I don't assume that the black dude also is a Nazi, but I wasn't there, so who am I to judge? But after the war, Eugene's like, white people are crazy everywhere. I might as well move back to the States for a little bit. So he lived in New York. He messed around some concerts for a little bit, and eventually he was an old man. He got an old man job, and he was just operating an elevator. He'd operate this elevator, and he had all his medals on his chest, and TV producers would be going up and down. They're like, man, this dude's got stories for days. So for the rest of his life, he was kind of a fixture on TV, and he'd tell some cool-ass Eugene stories or whatever. I skipped a lot of parts of this man's life because there's just too many things to list. But basically Hollywood, what I'm picturing is like a Forrest Gump style story, but in this story, Forrest Gump's not a dumbass and all the things actually happened.